Look, I welcome all of this. Great. I want a better path. I just don't want the people who put us in these positions to fool voters into thinking that they've turned over a new leaf, especially not during an election year. So the news came out late last night. It is such welcome news that the King County Superior Court is going to be taking steps to deal with our massive eviction backlog, at least in King County. It doesn't help you if you're a landlord outside of King County, but usually when King County does something, other counties and the state will follow suit. So a letter was sent out from King County Superior Court saying they were implementing changes to address the eviction backlog. We know some landlords are waiting more than a year to even have their eviction cases heard. There will be a new process for unlawful detainer hearings, which are heard in the court's ex parte department. The court is expanding the calendar for unlawful detainer hearings, implementing new screening protocols, and increasing the number of judicial officers available to conduct such hearings. Under the new system, unlawful detainer actions will proceed via first and second show cause hearings. All hearings will continue to be on Zoom. The number of available hearing slots for the first unlawful detainer show cause hearing will start and expand through steady increases over the next several months, with a target of 50 cases per calendar. So they see that there's a problem. They recognize that there's a problem. There was a quote in there from Judge Ketu Shah, but rather than read that quote for you, we invited him on the show today to discuss these changes. Judge Shah, welcome to Undivided. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you for making some changes. I think there's a lot of housing providers who have been very, very frustrated with the state of things, who are breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief today. Can you just articulate for us what the most critical of those changes will be?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we're trying to increase capacity to give people access to our courts. So to have more hearings and more quickly, because we've been overwhelmed by the number of filings coming into our court, and we can only do so many hearings in a given session or calendar, if you will. And so what we're trying to do is triage the cases. The ones that need longer hearings, we're sort of setting out to individual judges. The ones that have shorter hearings, our commissioners will handle, and they'll have increased calendars to hear those shorter matters, so that we can just kind of more quickly process cases and really give everybody access to our courts.
Was this a decision you were able to make on an island on your own without any approval from anyone else?
Well, we as a third branch of government, control our operations, and our operations are dictated by resources, budget that is granted by the legislative branch and the executive branch. And so we have been advocating for additional resources. We testified at the state legislature in January to advocate for additional resources statewide, because there are other courts in other cities that are facing similar issues. And then we advocated at the local level for resources as well. So we are working with our existing resources, but we believe that this is not going to fully help us catch up with the backlog and also deal with the increased number of filings. And so we are also in a budget cycle and asking for additional resources, both commissioners and judicial officers, as well as staff.
So just so I understand correctly, you're making these changes using your existing resources. Does that mean that your pleas in Olympia and locally, you did not get additional resources as you'd requested?
In Olympia, it did not get out of committee, and so we're going to advocate again this next session. It was a short session last January. This next session is a longer session, so we're hoping to advocate again. With the county council, they and the executive, they've been very receptive to our needs. We've provided them the data and the information, and so we're in those conversations. Obviously, there are limited resources, and so difficult decisions have to be made, but we are making the case that this is an access to justice issue, access to the courts. Both tenants and landlords need these issues resolved in an orderly and timely way, and that's why we need to increase our capacity.
So if you haven't gotten any additional resources, you're working on that end, but you've still been able to make these changes, the natural question is going to be, why didn't you make the changes sooner?
Well, we have, as we saw the filings come increased. Part of our change of operations is to make sure we're not reacting to just a temporary blip as opposed to a trend. And so as we saw the trend develop, and that's been about, a few months now, we have been working internally with our operations. We have a rulemaking process, a clerk's notice process. We have to make sure we create the calendars. So it just takes time to create the capacity internally, that structural organization. We are able to do that because we have some funding from the Cliffer, the federal funding, that allows us to have some staff to deal with evictions. That funding will expire at the end of this year. So we wanted to make sure we took advantage of that funding now and tried to increase that capacity, hopefully developing a pilot, if you will, to see that this will work, and so that it'll persuade our funders that this is money well invested to continue this process.
And this might be a difficult question to answer, but if you're able to give me a ballpark, what would this mean, just practically speaking, for a landlord or housing provider who has, they're trying to push ahead with an eviction from a time perspective? For instance, we just had one on our show 2 weeks ago who said that his court date that he was given was March of 2025, which is obviously very frustrating for him. Can you give me any sense of how much this could shorten those wait times?
I think our hope is to make that quite a bit shorter, because you're right, that length of time for a hearing is extremely long. 6, 8 months is just too long for people to wait. For both sides, I think they want some kind of finality of whatever the decision will be. So we're going to set a first hearing in 30 days and then a second hearing in 30 days. And then after that, we hope to get if it's still a contested hearing where they need more time in court, then we hope to get them in front of a judge or commissioner. So I'm hoping that we will cut this time in half. I can't promise that. It'll sort of, as we develop and as we see how this process works, but our goals are to substantially reduce the time necessary for these hearings to be adjudicated on the merits.
And will that start with the person who's been waiting in line the longest, or will you sort of triage new cases as they come in? Or is this going like back of the line, you get to be triaged first?
We're going to be triaging new cases first and then, see how that goes. And then as we get a handle on these calendars and figure out our capacity, then we might try to go to the cases that are pending, and those that are waiting the longest, try to move them up. But that process, again, is just, organizationally, we have to kind of work through those calendars, work through those cases. And it takes staff hours, it takes organizational ability. And so that's why getting this in place took us some time. And now as we do it, we're going to learn as we go and then make improvements moving forward.
And Judge Shah, I know we just have a couple more minutes with you. I appreciate you squeezing us in today on this because it's such a critical issue. So I'll end here. One of the concerns that's been brought to us by housing providers is you have a system through policy where the tenants get free attorneys. And I mean, I don't know that they have an issue per se with them getting free attorneys, but they feel like when they finally get in front of someone for their case to be heard, the housing justice provided attorneys seem to be dead set on delaying things as far as they can for their clients. Have you seen intentional efforts to delay these cases as long as possible?
I have not. Whenever we get a request for a continuance, we get this in all aspects of our court, whether it's a eviction type of case or a criminal case. An attorney will ask for a continuance because they need more time to prepare. Part of the analysis for us is how much time do they need? When did they come on the case, or what have they done to the point of when they asked for the continuance? And then we make those individual determinations. And so oftentimes we get an attorney who comes in maybe at the last moment and said, oh, my client just reached out to me. I've just been retained. I need some time to prepare. Or in this case, an attorney has been appointed just recently. And so the attorney needs time to prepare. We, of course, want attorneys to be prepared. It makes the hearings go faster and be more efficient. So we will grant a continuance. If there is some intentional delay, so to speak, as you mentioned, then we look at that and we will deny motions to continue if that information surfaces to us. We don't assume that. It has to be presented to us. And then once we look at the facts and individual circumstances of the case, we make that kind of decision. In our process that we've just implemented, our hope is to get that screening done for counsel earlier in the process. So that way that person can get an attorney earlier, and then they can begin preparing for whatever defense or rights they want to litigate.
All right, Judge Shah, we appreciate your time. And I'll tell you what, you go to Olympia next session and they're not giving you money, you just get in touch with us. And we'll complain about it on the show until they open up their pocketbooks, okay?
Appreciate the conversation today, and anytime. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, we'll ask them to open up their pocketbooks as long as the money's going to be well spent. I mean, we need to get landlords out of the situation that they're in. It's ridiculous. And it's similar to what we just talked about with Gavin Newsom. You wait till the problem's that bad before you do something about it. We've been screaming from the rooftops for a year and a half about how bad the situation was with evictions, going all the way back to that Seattle landlord who we had on the show multiple times, who was dealing with a ridiculous situation. There's so many things, and I would say in Washington State in particular, where it's like, Jaskaran Singh in Bellevue, he had to hold protests for how many Saturdays in a row? Did Jaskaran Singh hold protests outside the home where there's a guy living there who hasn't paid rent in 2 years, despite getting his rent covered by the taxpayers? It's insane. So part of me wonders, is it the public pressure campaign that has finally forced King County's hand? Or did they just wait until it was like screaming in their face so bad they couldn't ignore it anymore? So I'm glad they're doing something. As I told Judge Shah, I'm glad they're taking some steps. It's just a year or 2 years too late. And also, reasonable people should have been able to anticipate when we had these long, drawn-out eviction moratoriums during the pandemic, that when those ended, there was going to be a backlog of evictions and our system was going to be overburdened. So it's just an example of either government incompetence, intentional incompetence, it might be a little bit of the two, or just not caring, I guess. Just you have the Housing Justice Project, they're letting people live in people's homes for free and they're pushing the justice for all narrative. Maybe that's what they want. I don't know. But it's ridiculous. So I'm not going to sit here and celebrate people who are doing what they need to do a year or 10 years too late. It's important for voters to remember that. And I also don't know how much of this is because it's an election year. You look at Jaskaran Singh, someone who Democrats, as an Indian immigrant to this country from India, who Democrats probably think, oh, we got his vote in the bag. Well, now he's running for state senate as a Republican. So maybe they see that and they think, oh, this eviction stuff it's not going over so well for us. We're losing voters. So King County, can you guys, fix that? And then the narrative for us going into an important election will be like, no, we're taking steps to fix that right now. We've got that handled, so vote for us again and we'll do better. I'm sick of them saying that they'll do better in election years only. Election year courage. The least courageous of all the types of courage that there is.